Shiva to come to the dais and open the audience. Good morning, everybody. Another year has passed, and we are back for the Shimla Memorial Lecture, the second Shimla Memorial Lecture. As most of us know, we had the first Shimla Memorial Lecture last year, and Mushiri Hassan spoke on the occasion. Honorable Vice Chancellor had inaugurated the foundation last year. And as I said, another year has passed, memories have not faded, and the pain has not gone away at all. But I think as we move on, with each passing year, I think we get fortified in an academic sense, in the sense that what would Shamir symbolize for us, for the Department of History, for the researchers in this university, for academic research in general. I mean, many of the students sitting here may not have known Shamir at all, because they've come later. But I think, what is a student's memory to a university? I think somebody like Shamir should be remembered on the one hand, emotionally, yes, I have very strong and intense emotional memories of him. But on the other hand, I think it is also a sense of pride, a sense of strength, and a sense of guidance on how academic research should go on in a department or in a university. And so I think this gradually becomes an occasion where we kind of pledge to ourselves that about the kind of research that we will be doing as students, as teachers, as professors, whatever. So I am indeed proud, in a sense of a saddened pride, to welcome you all to this occasion. It gives me great pleasure to say that the Honorable Vice Chancellor, I mean, this program was organized at very, very short notice, and all the people who are sitting on the dais agreed to come. And I'm very, very thankful to all of them. They're all people who are busy, they're all people in positions, but they have taken their time off to be here for this occasion. I take this opportunity to welcome Dr. M.J. Francis, the head of the department, who has been the guiding light of the department in all the academic activities. Welcome, sir. The Honorable Vice Chancellor, he was supposed to go elsewhere, but considering the gravity of this event, has agreed to come, and I welcome him very cordially on behalf of the Shamir Foundation and the Department of History. Professor Sundar Sarukkai is a very well-known name, and I was very hesitant to call him at a week's notice. And he will, I think he will speak about how he responded to my call. I was very surprised. I was very delighted that with a week's notice, he readily agreed to come despite all his busy schedules. His semester is getting over at the center. I'm very, very glad you are here, sir, and cordially welcome you. Professor Pokar is also a very well-known name. He's retired from the Kalady University as Professor of Philosophy there, but still very active on the academic terrain. He also very readily agreed, and he also had some other engagement which he, I think, very readily put off in order to make it here. I welcome you. Dr. Madhu is an old friend. He's been here several times on our invitation. I'm very happy he is here. I welcome you, Dr. Madhu. The Pro Vice Chancellor was unable to come, and she's expressed her happiness at the event that is occurring. I welcome her in her absence. Dr. Annie is a colleague of mine. She is here to thank the gathering. I welcome her also. There's so many friends from different universities, different places, different institutes who are here for this occasion. I'm very glad. I'm very glad all of you are here. Shamir's family is here. I welcome all of you. Let this also be a kind of a homecoming where we rethink our academics and rethink on the kind of research that we are doing. I welcome you all. Thank you.
Honorable Vice Chancellor Dr. M.C. Dilip Kumar, eminent philosopher of science as well as social science, Professor Sundar Sarukkai, who will now deliver the second Shemi Memorial Lecture. The bereaved parents of late Shemi, whose love of their beloved son has now merged with the concerns of a community of friends and scholars of their late son in the broad areas of social sciences. Dr. P.K. Porker, formerly Professor and Head of Department of Philosophy at the University of Calicut, Dr. P. Madhu, Associate Fellow at the MD University, Dr. K. M. Shiva, under whose guidance and supervision the late Shemi worked for an MPhil degree, my colleagues in the department, and my friends and students from different departments of this university as well as other universities. It's now more than 2 years since Shemi left us. And it is now more than 3 years since many of us here in this university first met Shemi. But for the parents, relatives and friends of Shemi, I'm indeed aware that the reckoning of years of association would convey no meaning whatsoever. If you would permit, I shall cite from a letter of introduction which I happened to write on behalf of Shemi before he proceeded to the Center for Historical Studies of the Jawaharlal University 2 years back to appear for an interface at the Center for Historical Studies. Now I'm cited from that old letter, which I kept on my desktop for almost 1.5 years. Shemi has just finished his MPhil studies at the Department of History and has come out with a well-written and well-argued dissertation titled Trade, Capital and Colonialism, Historicizing Rauta Presence in Colonial Kerala. Though my familiarity with him is not older than the last 1 year, I have had occasions to monitor the progress of this promising researcher in history. In many of the seminars that were held in and outside the classroom, Shemi carried on well with his inquisitiveness and has impressed upon the members of the faculty. Right from the beginning, his enthusiasm and devotion to the topic of inquiry stood vibrant. I have had also occasions to talk to him about his topic of research. He has been able to argue, delineate, sift data, and express his lines of inquiries with well-grounded theory and doubt. Shemi's dissertation itself testifies to his studentship and scholarship. This was what I wrote about him nearly 10 days before his sad and unfortunate death. I kept that letter, I just told you, on my desktop for almost a year. While I reroute this, I'm equally aware that stronger and warmer ties than I ever had with Shemi did exist between many other colleagues of mine and Shemi. Many in the audience, of course I'm sure, had warmer and deeper ties with Shemi than the shallow association I ever had with Shemi. As we meet today to remember our beloved friend and student, it is also a consolidation and crystallization of the academic quest and spirit which Shemi always kept abreast. That a large number of us do share this quest and spirit is now manifest in the form of the Shemi Foundation, an academic forum at the Department of History of the Sankaracharya University, which has been trying not only to keep alive the fond memories of Shemi, but also to launch some concrete academic initiatives and engagements so as to turn the Shemi Foundation into a platform for intellectual exchange and debate, of course at the national level. Since Shemi symbolized many of these initiatives, and of course more than that, I do believe that this is the best tribute we can pay to the late Shemi, who is no more with us. He is a beacon of light that will always be luminous and one that will never fade away. The willingness of Professor Sundar Sarukkai, who needs no introduction to the students of philosophy and of course of the exact sciences, the philosophy of the interface between science and society, as well as the philosophy of Gaudian thought and knowledge system, to come over here and deliver the second Shemi Memorial Lecture is in itself a great honor and testimony to what Shemi stood for. It's also an international recognition, I would say, equally of the proposals of the Sree Foundation. The topic of the second memorial lecture is again an indication of the intellectual heights of scholarship which these proposals, which these proposed Sree Memorial Lecture take. If it was an opportunity last year with Professor Mushkil Hassan to be partners in freedom, this year Professor Sundar Sarukkai would take us to the nuances of being and becoming minority, a theme and a concern which is so relevant in contemporary Indian life and thought, and especially so in the context of the accumulating knowledge that's being produced in the social sciences in India. The voice of the voiceless minority and the dissent of the defenseless and the powerless minority need to be heard and addressed, not only by the powerful majority in the state, but also by the academic world of scholarship and the sustaining institutions of higher learning for an India that will live and last. We also look forward to the equally erudite discussions on the question of becoming minority by Professor P.K. Poker, as well as Dr. P. Madhu, which will follow Professor Sarukkai's presentations. I take this opportunity to remind all my friends, colleagues, students, and well-wishers of the Sree Foundation who are already here now, and all those friends in different parts of Kerala who have not been able to physically partake in the second commemoration lecture, that your involvement and cooperation constitute the working capital of the Sree Foundation. The Foundation, of course, will be in touch with you soon and will chalk out, with your support and cooperation, various academic endeavors in a manner befitting to the fond and cherished memories of late Sree, who will continue to live with us and inspire us for years to come. Thank you very much. Now, may I request Dr. N.C. Dilip Kumar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, to deliver the inaugural address.
Chairman of this meeting, Dr. N.J. Francis, Head of the Department of History, Dr. K.M. Shiba, Associate Professor and General Secretary of Sree Foundation, Professor Sundar Sarukkai, Director Manipal Centre for Philosophy and Humanities, Manipal University, and dear beloved academicians, Professor P.K. Poker, Dr. P. Madhu, Dr. Aniyati Saibre, the dignitaries on the stage and off the stage, and dearest family members of Shamir, dear teachers, dear research scholars, scholars from different institutions, and my dear students. I am delighted to be able to stand before you in the context of P.N. Shamir Memorial Lecture organized by Shamir Foundation and the Department of History, which has formed in the memory of P.N. Shamir, whose promising career ended in a tragic motor accident. This is the second memorial lecture conducted by the Department of History. Shamir was a committed, hardworking, young research scholar with loads of ambition and talents. His achievements in a short span of life itself tell his hardworking nature. His dissertation titled Modernity and Community Identity of Kerala in the 20th century bagged the best dissertation award from University of Calicut, a Commonwealth scholarship to study in Cambridge University. Many paper presentations in various academic conferences, like that many achievements and glory to Shamir's academic career as well as to Sree Sankaracharya University of Sanskrit and especially the Department of History. Within a short period itself, he proved his cost of learning, even though he departed. The Department of History remembers him in a good way by conducting annual lectures of social importance that keep the memories of this research scholar alive. Let me congratulate Department of History, especially P.N. Shamir Memorial Foundation for this program. And the sacred relationship between the research scholar and the research guide is very, very important. Nowadays, the relationship is questioning, actually. So it's a sacred relationship. So, Shamir may be a role model in research field. The representative of research scholars. So I can say proudly, then he is a role model. The topic of this memorial lecture itself is very relevant and of most importance. The term minority traditionally refers to a smaller part of a group or less than half of the people in a given society. And along with the term majority has an image of being rooted in numbers. In terms of social advocacy and civil rights, we are all familiar with the term minority groups. A minority group is a category that is differentiated and defined by the social majority. The differentiation can be based on one or more observable human characteristics, racial or ethnic minorities, gender and sexuality minorities, religious minorities, political minorities, etc., etc. Here we have an international reputed scholar to deliver P.N. Shamir Memorial Lecture. Professor Sundar Sarukkai is the professor and director, Department of Philosophy and Humanities, Manipal University. He obtained his PhD in physics, so that is it's a coincidence. PhD in physics and research in social science. So it is very great, the link between science and social science. So this is already said by Dr. Sree. He obtained his PhD in physics, and after that he worked as teaching assistant at Purdue University and later became the associate professor at Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. We are fortunate enough to have Professor Sundar, who has lectured both in India and abroad on various themes and various topics. So by considering the relevance of the topic on one side, and the remembrance of our beloved Shamir on the other side. So it may be a mixture of happiness at the same time. It is a sad memory. It's memory. So we are collecting from. So past is past. But one point, how to give birth to our Shamir. The only focus, that is for what he was here and what was his ambition. So in this juncture, this type of memorial lecture series is actually the real contribution to the memory of Shamir. So I do appreciate the Department of History and especially his guide Shiva for conducting this type of seminar for the remembrance of Shamir, at the same time to give some sort of memories, at the same time some sort of intellectual exercise in the form of this seminar. So I thank all of you once again, especially P.M. Shamir Foundation and Department of History for conducting this memorial lecture series with a relevant topic and reputed scholar. I wish you all success in future endeavors, and I am also ready to contribute to the Shamir Foundation some amount from my own salary for the great achievements that was contributed by the research scholar for this institution, and to spread the name of Sree Sankaracharya University in not only in Kerala, in outside Kerala, Delhi or other universities, and outside India. So once again, I pray for or wish for the betterment of this department, and the history department is going on smoothly, and the intellectual exercise carried on by the department is relevant, and I do appreciate the entire academic exercises that is going on in the department. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the inaugural address. Now it is time for the second Shree Memorial Lecture. Now I call upon Professor Sundar Sarukkai to deliver the second Shree Memorial Lecture on Becoming Minority.
Thank you, Professor Francis, and good morning. It's a great honor and pleasure to be part of this event, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Shiva for extending an invitation to do this. I'm delighted to be in the midst of Shami's family, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, whose remarks were very inspiring, and I'll come back to what he said. Old friend Professor Walker and Dr. Madhu. It's wonderful to be here because of a variety of reasons. So I want to begin with what happened a week or so ago when I spoke to Dr. Shiva about, when she mentioned to me about this memorial lecture. I was, of course, very touched by the fact that there is a memorial lecture for a student. And I think that says something very important about a university. Because I think in the time in which we live, and it's a discussion I've been having with faculty across the country, including people here yesterday, on this crisis of education. What does it mean to educate today? And what does it mean to teach? And what does it mean to do research and so on? While there is a lot of skepticism and sometimes cynicism about the very idea of a university today, I still think the most important component of a university is the student. It's students who make us teachers. I cannot be a teacher without my students. And if I have these students with me, what then am I supposed to do with them? How then am I supposed to engage with them? How do I teach them and how do I learn from them? And this is a constant struggle for us. And I think in the context of what has happened to universities today, it's a constant struggle we have with people around the country, not just students in our university. What are we supposed to do? Are we doing the right thing with the kind of teaching that we are doing, with the kind of texts we teach, the exams we have? So I think that reflection of this, I think, which animates every teacher, and I really believe, I can already see some of my old colleagues who are also teachers in different places in Kerala. I mean, everybody is deeply engaged in this question. And to me, to have an opportunity to be part of an event like this was something which was very welcome. So I didn't even, after I spoke to Dr. Shiva, of course, I didn't even have a second moment's thought about it. Although we would have to work out on travel and so on. But it was very clear to me that this was something I would like to be a part of. It is also something, as a teacher, I've found enormous benefit in doing this talk. Because, this is the reason why I chose this idea of becoming minority is something which I've been thinking about for some time, and I'll explain to you what context. It's an extension of a work which I've been doing with Gopal Guru on another context of caste. And so it was immediately, this is a question which has been very deeply troubling in my mind for a long time. And there are two events to it. One, of course, is the second part of the cracked mirror, which we are writing, Gopal and myself, on the idea of the social, construction of the social. And secondly, most recently in this public debate, a few of us have been having with Romila Thapar, and I'm mentioning Romila Thapar of great relevance to history since I'm speaking in the history department here. And some of you might know Professor Thapar wrote a piece, she gave a memorial lecture, which was also inspired by memorial like Chakraborty's lecture, where she spoke about the lack of a public discussion, and there's a lack of public intellectuals in India. I mean, why is it that there has been, especially in the given political situation in the country, she spoke about why it is so difficult for people to actually come together and talk about issues which are deeply troubling to the nation, to the community, to the people, to the students and teachers and so on. And so what happened with that piece was that it became far more dynamic than what she thought it would be, and then EPW published it. And then as a response, since various people wanted to respond to it, there was a discussion on this idea of the public intellectual and the idea of what is it that we as people, let's say in universities, are supposed to do. And it was, I think 4 or 5 of us were asked to respond to it, and we have responded to it, and it's now going to be published as a book by the Book Review. But to me, that engagement was all, which was very recent, so that engagement was also on top of my mind. And the question here was not what it is to be a public intellectual, but what is it to talk about these kinds of questions in the public? In other words, who is going to have the right to talk about what constitutes questions of oppression, humiliation, minority, and so on? Who is going to talk about it? If we have let the public space become a political space, and if we do not have the means of having 50 of us sitting together and saying what we want to say, and having a public discourse on it, what does it matter? What does education itself matter then? In other words, the question I think which Ramanujam was posing, and which at least the way some of us responded to, was not just in the context of being a public intellectual, but in being able to find forums for capacity to talk about these deeply troubling questions. And therefore, I think that was also in the back of my mind. And so I must actually thank Dr. Shiba and Shami in advance for making me finish this thought about becoming a minority. And that's something very important, I think, about people who leave residues behind. So, it's not just about having an idea which I wanted to come and speak, or having a paper which I had, which I wanted to speak here. It was actually a catalyst for putting this thought through. So I want to really thank you and Shamir in whatever sense of the spirit of the word, because it made me relook at this question and allowed me to articulate it in a particular way. I hope this particular way makes sense to you, but I want to begin with a very simple question about what does it actually mean to be a minority. When I'm asking this question, I entered into this question by asking myself, what is it to think about being minority? So I'm not going to talk about various kinds of theories on minority. There's extensive work in social sciences on that. So I want to look at, if all of us want to have a public discussion on it, how do I start thinking about what does it mean to be or become a minority? And I want to show you through this thinking, hopefully, that there are very many different meanings to this concept which is present. And I want to suggest that most times when we use the term minority, we are actually using different meanings of the terms. We are not really talking about the same thing. And hopefully I will show you how, through this philosophical exercise of thinking about minority, we can actually map out this whole domain of what constitutes the idea of minority. I'll begin with an example which I think illustrates the problem of minority. I have a PhD student in my department. He's working on philosophy of education. And for most of my students who go through our education system, the only work they want to do is a critique of the education system. So they want to write thesis on saying this whole system is wrong and all that. So he's working on one aspect of that. He, this year, a few months back, he was shifting his house in Manipal. He went to various places trying to get a house for rent. He did not get houses for rent. He went to many places, and everywhere he was told they can't give him a house. So you can immediately guess what the situation would be. I mean, Manipal is a small town. I don't think they've been exposed enough to the outside world as a town, because most of the people who are there come from the local regions and so on. Now, one day when he came and told me, he wasn't able to come for some meeting, and he said, I'm looking for a house, and I asked him, how come you haven't still found a house? He said, I haven't found a house. One of his friends immediately said, because he hadn't come, he said, he hasn't found a house because he's a Muslim. And so wherever he goes and they ask him, what's your name? And then they would say, sorry, there's no house, the house is not available. And what was very interesting was this. So when I met him after a few days and I asked him what happened, that he got a house, he said, yeah, he's found something somewhere. And then I told him, I asked him about this thing about the people refuse to give you a house based on your name because he's a Muslim. And he actually said something very interesting. He said that's very probably true because he's had that experience earlier. But he also said, when I went to these houses, he has long hair. And he said, when I went to these houses, even those people who wanted to give me a house, let us say, given my name, they didn't want to give a house to a person with a long hair. I'm giving this example because Asim, what's his name, is a student, he's a double minority. He's a minority in the sense of saying the house was not given to him because he's a Muslim name. But there are also people who didn't want, he's a double minority, they don't want to give to him because he's long hair. There is another whole image about long hairs. people are very suspicious about, especially in university campuses. So I want to use it as a starting point to ask, what is then the problem with university? What is the problem with being a minority? Where exactly is the problem for the student? And where does this idea of minority enter in when you are confronted with this kind of an issue? What is he supposed to then learn from such an event like this? And as we know, this is something which is duplicated across castes and communities and so on. So I wanted to start reflecting on this question of what kind of a problem is a problem of minority? What kind of a problem is it? And therefore, when I was discussing with them on this, so the question which comes is, how does someone become a minority? Where does this question of minority actually come into being? How is it sustained? How is it built upon? So these are the three simple questions which I began by looking at these simple questions. So I will first look at the standard discourse on minority. And this is the most common way of understanding minority, and it has been, as commentators have often pointed out, that it's just something which in the last few centuries, and all ideas of minority are very deeply related to other concepts. One, the concept of nation. It's very difficult for you to really conceptualize a minority without building a conceptual idea of the nation state. Then about social identities, which becomes far more prominent after World War II, and I think the European experience has contributed a lot to the enriching of the minority groups, the different kinds of ethnic minorities and so on. And then the question of representation. And finally the question of class. So I will point out how each of these factors influence the way we understand minority. So the minority, the idea, the word minority picks up different meanings for each of the tasks it's doing. So if it is a task which it is doing in the context of the nation, it has a different set of meaning. If it's a task it's doing in the context of representation, it has a different set of meaning. And I will also hopefully argue why these are so central to any idea of what we mean by minority. Now, the simple problem is this. If you have a nation, an idea of a nation, and if you have an idea of social groups and so on, then immediately you have something which is contiguous to it, which you need in order to have these concepts. And among them are the ideas of enumeration, census, counting basically, and then categorizing. In fact, Karnataka is doing a massive exercise on enumeration, the census. It is supposed to be called the education census, but it's actually a caste census, probably for the first time in this kind of a complexity which Karnataka government is doing. There's been some opposition, but people have been coming to my house and so on. So I think they're supposed to end by April 30th. And if the results are put in public, I think it's going to be very fascinating to actually see correlation between caste distribution, economic distribution, and education status. So the government is presenting it as education survey, but it's also an educational caste survey in a sense. So the enumeration is very important, and as I saw in the class when he came to my house to ask these questions, all these answers are actually codified because they can now be computerized, and then you have numbers that are coded. So there's no descriptions of it. So this is the nature of enumeration, counting, and categorizing. How do you put people together into this? And this is a very deep question which has been haunting social science for a very long time. I'll come back to how it reflects on the very philosophy of social sciences to that. Now, so in this sense of the word, if you are understanding society in terms of enumeration, categorization, census and so on, then the question of minority is very clearly defined and there's really no ambiguity to it. Minority is about small numbers. That's all there is to do with the question of minority. Minority is about a measure of people, proportional people in a population. And that idea, that somehow the idea of minority, the meaning of minority is present in the meaning of small numbers. That very conceptualization is enough to actually do very detailed, wonderful philosophical reflection on it. And one of the, if you look at the examples in languages, for example, minority in English seems to have very different connotations. I will come back to this, but for example, what I really am very uncomfortable with minority in its very literal sense as connected to the question of the minor in English. And the question of the minor as a legal term is a very problematical term because a minor is one who needs to be protected. A minor is one who is not yet autonomous. But if you look at Indian language terms, it already gives you a different kind of entry into it, and these are very representative of the definition of minority. In Kannada, Minority is Alpasankhya. I'm sure you can understand what it means. It's actually small numbers, very small numbers or some measure of numbers. And all reference to minorities are Alpasankhya. I asked one of my students who's from Kerala, and I shouldn't be talking about Malayalam in this room, you should be telling me what it is, but I'll at least tell you what my student said. He said in Malayalam it's called Nyuna Paksham. Nyuna Paksham. And I was very fascinated by this term because in the way I understood in my discussion with him, so again please correct me if I'm wrong, Nyuna Paksham, he was struggling to translate, and then he said, we both agreed that we'll call it subtraction from group. Does that seem correct? No? Okay, no, the reason is this. I want to point out there's a difference between Alpasankhya, minority and Nyuna Paksham, because all three are connoting something very different. Alpasankhya is very clear about numbers. Minority has a derivative, connotative meaning of small numbers. By itself, it doesn't seem to capture it because there are other connections to it. But Nyuna Paksham, as expected from Kerala intellectuals, is very deep. It's saying subtraction from group, and what it defines minority with respect to group, not in small numbers. Remember something very interesting. If I just say small numbers by itself does not make a minority. It is just small numbers. Small numbers never make a minority. In fact, there is nothing in the category of small numbers which makes it a minority per se. But this subtraction from larger group is actually a very fundamental core idea of what minority is.
Sometimes the small numbers are more powerful.
Exactly, and the very idea of small numbers not being a minority itself is a very important question. But you know, the point is there is something which is very central to this argument about small numbers. So for example, just to add to what you said, a small number which none of us would want to call as minority are the group of richest men in the world. I'm very specifically emphasizing on the men. I just saw this horrendous report, which I'm sure many of you must have talked about, and the latest count of distribution of wealth. 1% of the world's population is owning now 85% of the wealth, and 84 billionaires or whatever are owning 50% of the world's wealth. I mean, we cannot be in a state which can be any worse than this. But that minority of those 84 whatever super billion, they have to create new names for them, because billionaires doesn't make count. I mean, so these 84 people are owning 50% of the world's wealth, let us say, plus or minus 100 people. I mean, they are a small minority. The richest men in the world are the smallest minority in the world. At least other minorities have more people. And now to think that they could be minority and they are very exclusive, they don't let you into it, because unless you buy an island, you will not be part of it. So you cannot be members of that minority. It's a very exclusive club. But they are not. And in what sense would I be using if I call them a minority? This is true across, as you very correctly said, many small groups, which are also very powerful groups. So it seems to suggest it's a small group which is qualified with something. And that's what we see in the group of this characterization of these small groups, which really becomes central core of minority. Is it that a small group becomes a minority in the context of a particular relationship with a larger group? Now this, which you can obviously see are, probably something which is intuitively obvious to you. I will use this point to characterize what this relationship. And I want to draw upon a wonderful essay. I hope most of you would have read it or at least seen this. It's by Arjuna Appadurai, and it's a book. It's a collection of essays. The whole book is called An Essay on the Geography of Anger, but it's actually a collection of 5 or 6 different essays. And there is one essay which is, and he's trying to do. This is not an academic text, and this is why this whole idea which Dr. Sheila began with. What is it to do new kinds of research and new kind of academics? Here is one very good example of it. There are 6 non-academic essays, which means it doesn't have hundreds of references and citations and so on. And there is one essay, and which is also the title of this book, which is wonderful. I really was drawn to the title. It's called Fear of Small Numbers. That's it, fear of small numbers. And he's asking a very simple question. And this is the question of minority which he's posing us. If minority is about small numbers, why are you fearful of them? That is, becoming a minority is to be in a position where others around these small numbers are fearful of them. There's a double fear, of course, which is being used. The minority itself is fearing their presence in a society. There's a fear on them, and there's also fear of them. Because the majority discourse is always about the fear of these small minorities. And Apadara is trying to make sense of this. I'm just going to very briefly tell you how he makes sense of it. Many points of which I might not completely agree with, but it gives you a way into approaching the question. It's a way of thinking about minority which I found very useful. So just to very quickly tell you what he points out here, and we can discuss this later on if you want. The first point is the very division of the majority and the minority. This very division, very conceptualization of majority and minority is based on a larger social process. And this is the process of what sociologists have called the we formation. How do we become a we? That's the question. And there are many kinds of questions and theories about how 10 of us suddenly decide to become a we, either as, let's say, members of this university or Malayalis or members of Kerala or Kannadigas, whatever, or Indians or global citizens. How do we become a we? What is the process which is involved in that? And I said, this is the question which for Gopal and me is really the second part of our book, where we are really been thinking about. So the formation of the we for us has been a very integral question. There is the formation of the social. How is the social formed? And if you look at early accounts of sociology, or at least very standard traditional accounts of the formation of the society or the social is formed from individuals. So the social, if you like, can be reduced to that of individuals. So a social is just the sum of individuals. So we form a social, if I count each one of you and say there are 50 people here, and that counting, putting together of individuals constitutes a social. But we know that that is also a very deeply flawed account. It is a census account, it's an enumerative account of the social. The social cannot come in by adding things together by count. And one very good example, just to pay allegiance to my philosophy of science, because I'm not really talking philosophy of science today, is this wonderful questions in ideas of properties of matter, properties of things. And one very good example, and this is deep